the chat. Let me, I think this slide is even almost redundant. Anger is really an important driver in all human activities, okay, and especially in economic activities. It is important when you buy a product. It will kick in when you buy a product, or where you are bargaining with somebody, or even when you are trying to cooperate, as we all know, with somebody for work reason or other reason. And this is a bit puzzling, because I don't think there is any sort of doubt that anger lead to a destructive behavior. Okay, so it's quite accepted this in all literature that have dealt with anger, and this is clearly puzzling from a perspective of evolution. Why the evolution generate this sort of destructive emotion? And of course, we are not the one who asked this question. There were many people did, and notably, anger is considered as a credible act, as a credible commitment device. I really emphasize the word credible. You don't want to make somebody angry because because then he will do something. Okay, so it's clear. It's a credible thing. What this guy will do or she will do when he's angry? Well, they stop thinking carefully about the consequence of their action. I think it's a reasonable thing to say. For example, think about the ultimatum game, the simplest bargaining relationship you can think of. They take it or leave it offer. A responder will become angry and might stop thinking to realize that if he says, "I don't accept your offer," nobody will get anything. Okay, that's this anger, moment of anger, which in a sense we can define, if you allow me to cite the Pink Floyd, as a momentary lapse of reason. So this is what we will do in this paper. We'll try to investigate whether anger impairs our capacity of reasoning in strategic interaction. What the rest of the literature did and what is new on this idea, I think is quite new. And you know why? Because the current literature has really focused on another, obviously related, complementary, but on another mechanism, which is based on the so-called frustration-aggression hypothesis. In really very few words, this hypothesis implies that people change their preferences in the moment where they become angry. They become very keen in punishing. Okay, that's the idea. The anger is a change of preference that make everybody a bit nastier, to become a bit more keen on punishing. And this is the frustration-aggression hypothesis. Why this became prevalent in economic literature, this view became prevalent in economic literature, I think it's quite easy to understand. We are in a world dominated by other regarding preferences paradigm. Okay, so it's clear that Fair and the people from Zurich or Munich, they were very influential in the last 10-15 years, and then they brought this idea that which is a very appealing and probably true, that people have other regarding preference. They have a preference for other. This preference might be love or other, but might be also hating other or envying other. It can be positive or negative. And clearly in this framework, the frustration-aggression hypothesis was a clear add on these things. While we are trying to investigate a different mechanism, which again is not necessary, it's inconsistent, okay, can be completely complementary. Our mechanism is then cognitive. It's not preference, it's cognitive. And hinges and this I have to spend a bit of words on the so-called beauty contest game. I want to spend a bit of time to explain this game because I want to convince you that that's the best possible framework, an exercise we could choose for this paper. First of all, it's now almost the standard to test strategic sophistication. Okay, if you look at the recent papers, you will realize that it's very much used in the lab. So basically, for the people who don't know this game, members of a group simultaneously choose an integer between 0 and 100, and the subject to choose the closest is to p% of the average of all number win. The appeal of this game is that he's got only one Nash equilibrium, which is 0. This is very simple to show. If you choose, say, if it's 70% of your average, well, choosing any number above 70% of 100, so then 70, it's stupid. It's a dominated strategy. Because if you sum, even if everybody say 100, the average is 70. But given this, even P over P, 707 over 70 is a strictly dominated strategy, and so on and so forth, until the only one Nash equilibrium is close to 0. This is the game, and this is the canonical solution of the game for a purely rational individual with infinite order preferences, beliefs. Why we like this game? Well, the first reason is that this is the only game, or one of the few games we could think about, that doesn't involve punishment. Think about an ultimatum game. An ultimatum game, you never know if the guy rejects the offer because he wants to punish the responder or just because he gets mad somehow, momentary lapse of reason. Any game involving a bargaining relationship, really, it's got this problem of that you will never be able to tell apart the preference effect and the cognitive effect. While for the beauty context game, the best way you can do to punish your opponent is to win. Is doing exactly what you do for winning. No way. So the best thing you can do is winning the game. There is really no punishment, the destructive punishment involved. That's why we like this game. And also the second reason, which is the reason why essentially everybody uses this game, is because there is a nice taxonomy in terms of a level of strategic sophistication. The more iteration you do, the one I told you before, in terms of P of P of P of P of P, okay, the more sophisticated you can be considered. So the level K, well, 0, it's somebody extremely naive. We will assume actually that he plays randomly. K equal to 1, best respond to a guy who play randomly. K2, best respond to the K1, and so on. So it's a nice way of characterizing different levels of strategic sophistication. So what do we do? I mean, it's an experiment. We exogenously induce anger to casually study the impact on strategic sophistication in the way defined before. And we tried also in the induction to be as canonical as we could be, to use the most common and standard methods of induction. We've been looking for them and, asking people around. That was the most standard you could think of. Now, I want also to put another to tell you, it's good to induce external anger, incidental anger for us. Why? Well, since we are interested in telling apart the effect of punishment from the cognitive, it's much better for us to use an induction that generates anger from outside rather than generating anger between the two players, so the players in the lab, like often it happens in the literature. So in the literature, there are clever mechanisms to make people upset at each other, okay? To tease out the anger at each other. That was not good for us, because we really don't want that people get angry at each other. We want that people get angry to generate this momentary lapse of reason, okay? And what we also do, and this I would like to emphasize because I think it's our methodological novelty, is that we are using textual analysis, the one Chris mentioned before, to analyze whether this induction, in a way I'll show you, whether this induction was successful in doing what people are supposed to do, get angry, okay? We are using textual analysis, which is a novelty. I've never seen anything done like that for validating an anger induction. Then a big question is, well, but your momentary lapse of reason, it's for anger, or is in general for all negative emotion? Well, it's a good question. And what we did is to, after we did the first experiment, which is, by the way, pre-registered, so we stated the hypothesis ex ante and the design of the experiment and the number of people we are going to use in the lab ex ante. After we did the first experiment on anger, we said, okay, now let's see if other negative emotions spark the same effect. And the other basic negative emotions are sadness, disgust, and fear. We decide to pick up sadness because sadness was the one with the most similar induction procedure. I'll be more clear very soon. So we ran a second pre-register experiment, identical as it could on the first, with the only difference that instead of inducing sadness, anger, we induced sadness. An overview of the result, a spoiler, okay? Anger negatively affects the strategic sophistication, both in terms of iterated reasoning, then in terms of theory of mind. Just bear with me, I will define that second thing. These effects are not generally induced by all negative emotions. We'll see that the effect of sadness is much less clear. This is the outline of the rest of the presentation, just to give you a bit of a compass. I will illustrate experimental design and implementation, the result. Then there is a problem because it's not easy to look at the level K. We need to estimate it in a certain way. And so we have to refer to a model, which we will build and we estimate. Then we discuss how this result can is interesting. Why is interesting? For example, we will show that anger is it could be a very powerful negative externality for cooperation. If people which are angry for other reasons go and cooperate, well, the chance that they will manage to cooperate well are lower. So you see, as an externality. So in a country where people tend to be angry, they tend to be even less cooperative, and that's an externality. And also we'll show how this is really, we will bring back the ultimatum game and show how this result can explain something about the ultimatum game. So now let me just go through the if you have any question about the introduction, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I will go to the experimental design and implementation, or just put in the chat. Okay, I'll go ahead. Feel free to ask me a question about at any time you want. How you implement the beauty contest game in the laboratory. We follow a paper which has been published on Journal of Political Economy recently from David Gill and Victoria Prose. We use their their design. Participants were randomly sorted in group of 3 people. Okay, so it's only 3 people, the group of participant of this ultimatum game. Many groups of 3 people, clearly to increase the number of independent observation. Okay, that's the reason why we wanted a smaller group. Each group consisted of 3 subjects that received 2 different induction. Okay, so notably in this case, or anger and neutral at the control, or sadness at the control. That was important because this allowed us to tell the people, look, other people have received induction that might well be different from yours. So we put the people in a situation where they don't know whether the other person is angry or not. This is clearly help us to better identify the effect of being angry yourself against the effect of dealing with an angry person. So the member of each group simultaneously choose an integer between 0 and 100, and the subject who chooses the closest to 70%, as I said before, the average of the 3 numbers win. The same procedure is being played 10 times without rematching, so in the same group. Okay. The participant who win basically each round earn 10 pounds, while the others earn nothing. They knew that. And if there are more than one winning number, we equally split the 10 pounds. To avoid wealth effect, we told participants that we will only pay 1 round. Okay, so that's to avoid that if a guy is earning a lot, he gets a bit relaxed. That's the usual way to do that. Now, just to make sure that we understand each other, what are the main indicators of strategic sophistication? Higher K, like I said before, correspond to higher capacity of iterative reasoning. But before, be careful. This is a bit as subtle nuance of the ultimatum of the beauty contest game, which is a bit present on all these games of strategic interaction. There is not only the capacity of doing iterated reasoning in it, there is also the capacity of understanding what the other people are doing. Because, imagine you are very, very good at doing iterated reasoning, but you are a bit, sorry, I'm using a word might not be a bit politically incorrect, but we are scientists, okay? If you are somebody a bit Asperger or a bit, that don't look to the other, autistic, what you do, you iterate forever. You might iterate forever, not thinking that the others don't do that, and then you are loser because the game is not really getting closer to Nash. It's winning. And so you see, you have two features here. The first is the capacity of iterating, but the second is the capacity to understand what the other could have done. Okay, the two elements conflate in this game, which, if you want, is a bit a limit of this. But at the moment, I never seen any game of strategic interaction that doesn't have these two things combined. Okay, I've seen other game of strategic interaction. Some people have done some other, but they have always this problem that you will never be able to understand, to tell apart clearly your emotional intelligence, if you want to use this word for theory of mind, and logic intelligence, which is the capacity of iteration. Okay, so this we have to live with that and look at both. But this is basically the main indicator of strategic sophistication.
Eugenio, may I quickly interrupt? Do you have differential hypotheses whether anger affects either of those two outcome variables in a different way?
We didn't state any hypothesis at the beginning. So no, we just said we expect that angry people will do worse.
On both measures.
On both measure, yeah. We didn't do in our registration. We didn't clearly go farther than that.
So your analysis is explorative also with regard to the other emotions. You don't have specific hypotheses regarding sadness, frustrations, and the other emotions you measured, or do you?
No, the idea was, okay, this is, I tell you exactly what, because it's nice now that we have registered, so it's good. It's very, in my view, the registration is good for this. In our registration, we said, let's see whether anger affects negatively strategic sophistication, and we don't tell apart the two reasons. It's, as you say, in this respect, we are a bit a step behind that. Once we found this, we said, okay, anger affects negatively strategic sophistication. Let's see if sadness does the same, because if sadness does the same, well, we can argue that is a characteristic common on all negative emotion. And this is what we declare, okay? So the first focus of our analysis was anger, because we have an hypothesis was born from this, literature, from the idea of this momentary lapse of reason. But then we say, okay, fine, it might be that is not exactly that. It might be that is, in general, all negative emotion. So let's look at another negative emotion, at least to understand if it's common, okay? That's the...
Thanks.
Anger is induced following a standard procedure, which I already said that. That they ask to write a bit an episode. I will state the words in the next slides. I'll show the words in the next slides. To write about an episode where they experienced anger, okay? So it's by writing that we induce anger. While in the control group, which is a neutral, hopefully neutral, I mean, as neutral as you can get, subjects are asked to write about activity that they did a specific day. And as I told you, this is registered. This first experiment is registered, so it can be just, you cannot click, but you can find easily on the American Economic Review registry. And this is the anger induction. What are the 3 to 5 things that make you, first of all, ask you, what are the things that make you most angry? Okay, that's the first question. And the second question asks you to go a bit more in detail to give us an example of what this element made you really angry, okay? We tease out these things. That's the anger induction instruction. Again, we've been very, very canonical. We took it from an experiments in psychology, and we just did this. The neutral instruction instead is, what are the 3 to 5 activities that you did today? It says, just first of all, and then we ask more specifically something about yesterday, bad the day, okay? To try to mimic exactly the order, but without, hopefully, without, or in average at least, without evoking any bad emotion or any emotion of anger. For sadness, well, again, simple. I already said more or less this is what I said in this slide. And this is the treatment for in sadness, that, as you can see, has the nice feature to be exactly like the one of anger. The only difference is that instead of using the word anger, use the word sadness, okay? But it's very simple. And that's why it was so appealing for us, instead of disgust or other negative emotion that would have, we needed to have used a different way of thinking. So this is the timing of the experiment. The subject fill the 2 questionnaires. a demographic, the usual demographic question, and a PANAS questionnaire, which is a questionnaire which is usually employed by psychologists to understand whether effectively the induction was successful. We have been following the psychologists also on this respect. Then people play the beauty context game, as I said, 10 times without rematching, and then a final questionnaire where we ask the PNAS, which was the PNAS is a question that need to be asked at the beginning or the end. It's what this way is done. Then we also ask them to self-report inductions and to tease out the memory, and this is the sessions. We see the first experiment was done here in June 2009, well after we registered. And the second experiment was done in October, again after we registered, and you can see that we try to make the experiment as close as possible. I mean, we run experiment in the time which is as close as possible, so to avoid to lose control from it. We have about 180 subjects for each, which is what we more or less declared ex ante to generate the power we wanted. Okay, now this is the implementation. I can take question about the implementation if you want. I can see that Alessandro is doing an excellent job in replying to this question. So I don't know if you have you want to speak up, you have any question about the implementation, you want to ask me directly, whatever. Otherwise, I will go on with.
I think Laios had a question regarding whether there are sort of like differences between what angry means between different participants, and because of different cultural backgrounds.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, and clearly that's a good question, and the answer is that yes, at work this is a big problem. I mean, this is a big feature. It's not even a problem because it, diversity can increase the portability of an experiment. So what we did is that we also control for nationality and native language in our analysis, okay? And also, I think, I'm sure we did it, we also try to understand if between control and induction, there is any statistically significant difference in terms of culture between the two groups. For example, if the British white are more represented in one group than in another, and it turned out that the randomization was done properly. So we are not particularly worried about that. Okay, since you have a placebo, a control and an induction, these are problems that if you have a sufficiently large number and if there is no clear bias, more or less shouldn't be a big worry about that. But it's interesting. It's also interesting that we, at some point, we also asked them that they could state their emotion, their writing in their own words, okay? And I think some of them did. And what we did is that we asked Google Scholar to translate, Google to translate, and then we used this translation for the textual analysis, okay, to be sure that we were using everything, but not many actually. If I'm wrong, Alessandro can correct me, but I don't think many people decided to write in language which was different from.
Eugenio, actually it was only one person.
Okay, only one person. Yeah, but other people could nevertheless have a different culture, and we control for this diversity. It's a great, in my view, it's a great field of study, great analysis, possibilities to understand what is the difference between different, how anger interact with culture to generate determined effect. That would be a fantastic idea to, in my view, to follow. Now, first of all, this is our analysis, our really, the analysis we are, it's the original, okay? The first time this has been done. We are particularly proud of that. And the textual analysis applied to the induction. What happens here? This is the experiment 1. This is the anger in the text. Okay, the textual analysis. We are using a software which is by Pennebaker, professor at University of Texas, which is the software to analyze emotion, feelings in the text. It's one of the most used, if not the most used. We recently did a conference on textual analysis. We invited Pennebaker, who came from, we are in touch with him. So as you see, in the anger in the text experiment 1, the anger group do exactly what they say they did. They wrote things that involved anger. Okay, so this is really, first of all, this analysis is interesting because it tells you whether they followed our instruction. You ask them to talk about anger, and effectively they talked about anger. Okay? Now let's look at the experiment 1, which is the one induced anger, the sadness. Well, there is a bit more sadness than in the control group. Of course, when you talk about anger, there is a bit of sadness, but it's much less, as you can see. It's much less and significantly less than anger. Let's look at experiment 2. Anger in the text. In the sad group, yes, there is a bit of anger in the text of the sad group, but less than what is sadness in the text of the sad group, as you can see here. Okay, so it looks like people followed our orders. We can push this interpretation forward? Well, perhaps yes, depends. If you believe that when you write things, like Pennebaker does, when you write things, effectively what you write is transferred on your emotion, well, you can say yes. Effectively, people wrote about things and make them angry or sad, and in fact, they become angry. It depends whether you believe on that induction or not. But at least we are sure that people followed our instruction. Alberto is asking me, okay, in the control group, so I'll get back. This is in the control group, okay? They are asked about what they did what the 5 activities that you did today, okay? That's a standard thing to talk about. Now, now let's look at the other questionnaire, whether we can infer from memory. Oh, no, this is the PNAS. Alex, sorry, this is memory of PNAS. Do you remember? Sorry.
This is, yes, it says PANAS, right?
PANAS.
So it should be, yes.
Okay, that's the PANAS, the questionnaire PANAS, where you ask the people before and after their feelings. And effectively, the PANAS say that in the PANAS way, effectively in the experiment 1, people are made anger. In the experiment 2, people are made sad. Okay.
Eugenio,
Yes.
the scale, those are within subject changes in angriness, in anger on the scale from 1 to 4, or what is the scale?
The change, I think, is the change from the question before, the PNAS question before, the PNAS question after.
But what is the question about, like, how angry do you feel right now on a scale from 1 to 4? Is it that?
Yes.
Alex, can you please respond to this?
Yes, I think what you are saying is right. And to the PANAS questionnaire, we added these questions on anger and sadness from the large PANAS questionnaire. And it's the question of right now, how much anger are you feeling right now? Yes.
Okay, and would you consider that a big effect or a small effect? I mean, on a scale from 1 to 4, and changes of about like 0.2.
Look, I wouldn't expect a huge effect on this induction in general, because you are asking people to record some evidence. So in any case, these are induction that do not really make people really mad or really angry. This is well known, but is nevertheless an effect. In a sense, the fact that we are inducing not a strong effect, a strong emotion, and still observe an effect, we took it as a symptom of robustness of what we are doing, okay, of a thing that we are doing. But
Eugenio,
yeah,
I want to add that the second time we asked this questionnaire was after the game, not after the induction itself.
yeah, they had also time to count down.
Yeah.
So it could be that the game made them angry. Well, no, that would be.
There is a possibility of endogeneity, yes, of course, but that's why we are not using this in the. We are, and that's all. You know why, Reto? You know why I'm also happy about your question, because that push a bit more our mechanism of textual analysis, because there we don't really elicit anything, we don't ask anything ex post, ex ante. It's just the text speaking. So in this sense, that will bring a bit more validity, if you want, or interest in using our textual analysis, because it's clearly not, and you don't have any problem of endogeneity there. It's the text.
Okay.
That they wrote ex ante. Now, let's start with the capacity of iterative reasoning. This is a first approximation, because I told you, in the model, what you really want to observe is K, but you cannot observe K with the raw data. But, some people like to see the raw data, and also it's well known that raw data makes sense in this case. And here is the idea is that the closer you are to Nash, to 0, the more you are able to make iteration. Okay, that's the idea. So in this case, you see there is an effect which is significant. It's not huge, but again, it's not huge because we are really not generating strong feelings. That's the reason. I think we can safely say. But you see a clear decrease in terms of effect. Here you have the angry people that tend to spit numbers which are higher than the control group. Okay, in every single round, which is not the case if you look at the sadness. Okay, at the sadness, actually in the sadness, slightly higher the control than the sad group. So this is the first approximation of this first capacity of iterative reasoning. Here we do a bit more controlled analysis. We add more control, because it's clearly that you cannot really pull together all this data. People have played several times, they have learned from the past. The past matters because it's important what they did in the last guess. And we add all this control in the regression. We also control for group fixed effect, and we cluster the errors at the group level. And as you can see, even controlling this effect, this anger treatment, generate a number which is in average 2.5 below, out of 100. Okay, it's not huge. Again, it's not huge, but we're not expecting a huge effect because we are really making a mild induction overall. But you see, it's significant, and there is not significant effect on the guess, which is more interesting, which is very important, because which it's not very important. It's more or less what we were expecting. Okay, that's is not. You see, the importance of registering the experiment sequentially. So we didn't run the two experiment at the same time, and we register in the same time. That could generate some suspect of phishing expedition. Okay, we did the first experiment, we test the first experiment, we got something, and then we went to the second experiment knowing the result of the first. So it was not really a fishing expedition. Otherwise, if we had to do the two together, well, we should have used some sort of control for multi-comparison, okay? We should have used, and well, in this way, it's really clean, one after the second, the other. Let's look at the theory of mind. The theory of mind is safely measured by the payoff, the capacity of winning, because the guy who were able to understand what the other were doing is the guy who, and apart from being able also to iterate on top of that, was the guy that eventually won. Well, here the picture in my view is even more clear. There is always angry people in average earn less, consistently less than the control group, while for experiment 2 is a bit more, the more mood, more unclear. We did the same exercise of an econometric model where we control for guess of the other player, because in this case, you see, since it's a winning, the fact that you won also depends on what the other player guessed. So we have to control for that. And we control for the guess of the last period, because it was anyway a driver of the guess now. Sorry, here it should be payoff, not guess. Okay, it should be payoff. There is a typo here. It should be payoffs. As you see, there is a negative and significant effect in the anger treatment, but there is not a significant effect in the sadness treatment, which is more or less what we expected. These are the
May I ask why you control for guess of other players?
This, right? Guess of why?
Yeah.
Yes, because when you win, okay, you win because you got the things right given the guess of the other player. That's why the guess of other player affect your win. So your win is affected by your guess, but also the one of the other two. So we have to control for that. But anyway, it's I don't think that even taking away this control will change very much, but that's the reason.
Okay.
Now, last point, we need to calculate our K. I gave you already a preview. I gave you the raw data, but it's good to understand better the structure. Okay, to go a bit deeper into what's going on. Okay, and we built we analyzed a model where the assumption is that the guess of each individual of the subject I in group G around T is an independent row over runs and subject. So essentially that means that subject pick up the rule at beginning of each round. Okay? The rule is K, the rule K at beginning of each round. Okay, so this is all what we assume. So we have this group in this round, and each subject at each round decide today I'm going to be K something. Doesn't matter which one. If K is 0, the subject spit a number randomly. Boom, whatever. If K is bigger than 0, the subject aim to guess 7 over, I remember 0.7, K, the average of the other. Look at the average of the other and say, okay, let's assume that we are going to say exactly the same of the other. Okay, if this is true, I'm a little bit clever, I go to multiply by 0.7. Oh, but if I'm more than a bit clever, I say, okay, if everybody does this reasoning, let me do it again, and so on and so forth, and iterating this. This is the way of thinking of our subject, what we are assumed to be. Clearly, it's random. It's random. What is where the randomness come from? Well, the randomness come from that people are there, they don't have a paper or pen, they cannot calculate, they are able to, they will make a mistake. And this is the randomness. Okay, the randomness, there are two randomness. The first is this key 0, which anyway is a random number split there. We don't know why, how it comes. It's there. That's the first randomness. The second randomness is even the subject which have a k which is bigger than 0. There are also people make mistake. Okay, when they calculate, a human being make mistake, they calculate and they can make an approximation, bigger or lower. The important is that it follows a random process. We use two random process for calibrating, for estimating the model. We use the normal distribution, the canonical normal distribution, but we also use the Poissonian distribution, which is nice because it doesn't have any, since it's more for discrete numbers. Okay, that's why it was more appealing, and it was appealing that we did for both, and we didn't find difference for that. And this is our result. In the experiment 1, the people split number randomly. Okay, they were there, they were angry, say. They just throw numbers like that. They were 0.34, while in the control group they were 0.25. Okay, this is a big difference. Difference. While if you look at experiment 2, consistent with what we saw before, actually is slightly the opposite. It seems that in the control group they were a bit less thoughtful than in the SAT group. Level 1 is similar, and level 2, it's again angry individual a bit lower than that. For the rest, it's too small. And even if you take the average, you see that the average, K average in the anger experiment 0.86, while in the control is 1. You don't see the same difference into the sadness experiment. Now, this is the result of the experiment. Now, let me talk a bit more. Why is this interesting? After all, it's the usual question that if you go to interview somebody in the job market, you ask them, so what? Okay, so what? Well, so what? If it's true that anger generates an externality, well, we have to be careful, because in country where people are angrier, for example, in poorer country, I'm sure if Dick Easterling would be here, he would object against this this claim. But I think that I don't know. I think we can say that in poor country, people tend to be angrier than in richer country. Well, they have a further disadvantage because they are angry and they don't know how to cooperate, or they cooperate in a bad way, and it generates problems, all sorts of problems. To try to bring this in our data, to bring this argument in our paper, we used another paper of ours, always with Alex, and Sebastiano Massaro, who is a neuroscientist. It's a paper now. I think it's available on the web. It's submitted to a journal, where we induced anger in a repeated prisoner dilemma, before a repeated prisoner dilemma. And we use this data, the data of that paper, the result of that paper, to quantify the effect on strategic sophistication. The assumption, which is also backed by a robust number of empirical evidence, is that people, when they play prisoner dilemma in the lab, they 80% of time, they either play tit for tat, or grim trigger, or always defect, just defect. Okay, and that's an assumption we started with. And so the idea is that at the beginning of each super game is a repeated prisoner dilemma. So there are several super games that are played. Each super game is played with one subject. Then they are rematched. At the beginning of each game, the subject decide what sort of strategy he wants to implement, and he does it arguably by maximizing his or her profit. Now let's bring this into a K logic, a K level logic. Okay, the repeated prisoner dilemma into a level K logic. Let's do that.
Eugenio, can I just like very briefly interrupt you? We only have like 4 minutes left.
Okay, so if
Just
we
for you to keep in mind. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I will be quick. Yeah, a K0, people, they just decide the strategy, you know, whatever, 1, 2, 3, it's fine. K1, subject optimal respond to this K0 people, these naive people, or maybe angry people, mad people, you know. Well, one way you do that, what happens is this, that K1, effectively, if you are K1, you would use a strategy of cooperation, which is tit for tat or Graham trigger. But if you are K0, well, you can do both. You can choose also always the fact with probability 1/3, because we are assuming that is uniform. Well, then this generates less cooperation, because the guy who is K1 might bump into an angry guy that just spit a strategy which is always the fact, and then they stop cooperation, because once the other stop cooperating, you also yourself stop cooperating, and that's on. And in fact, from the data of our Volt paper, we found that in the treated group, there were 9% more subject playing at this strategy, which implied that the anger treatment, that treatment was much stronger, because we show a very nasty movie to these people, increased 27% the number of K0 subjects. This using that. Now, just bringing this logic into the ultimatum game, the game we started with. Think about, you are a guy, you are a level K, clever guy, but you might be facing an angry person, and the angry person might just randomly reject your offer, just randomly, because he or she thinks it's too low for some, because you're angry. You know, when you're angry, you're angry. Well, this is, using this logic, you can make sense of many results that you observe in the lab in the ultimatum game. Essentially, people in the ultimatum game, you know, if you put the bar too low, you offer too low to the other, he will or she will react by rejecting the offer. There is evidence, because some psychologists did the ultimatum game with an induction, anger induction. Effectively, they show that when angry people are angrier for some reason outside the relationship between the two players, they reject more often. So it seems to me. So even in the ultimatum game, this logic can be brought. The conclusion, and it's really the end. So as I said, the anger negatively affects the strategic justification. Angry subject use K0 more often. Sadness doesn't seem to generate the same effect. In a repeated prisoner dilemma, angry people generate less cooperation, and we show this with our data. Last but not least, I will finish with Machiavelli quotes. A very wise thing to simulate madness. Assume that you are not angry, but you are really, really, really sophisticated. The best thing you can do is to show anger, show madness to the other people. And this is actually called madman theory, and many people think that Trump is actually playing this game of looking angry, so that if you look angry, you know you are facing somebody who is not keen on reasoning, so he will gain a lot of bargaining power. And that's the end.
Thank you so much, Eugenio. That was brilliant. And also to the dot. Are there any questions? We have already had a lot of questions during the presentation, but are there any questions left for discussion?
Can I have a very quick one, if you don't mind? If you have time. Thank you very much. That was super interesting. Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the model, the payoffs. If you could show the table again. There is so do I get it right that it's payoff on the scale of 0 to 10 pounds, right? No, the reduced form model for the payoff that was before, not the K levels, the ones you were showing before.
Yes.
Yeah, the next slide, if you don't mind. Thank you. So here it's on the scale from 0 to 10, right? Of the payoffs.
They earn 60 cents, right? 60 cents.
Yeah, I was wondering about the coefficient on round. So there is a positive, significantly positive coefficient on round. So there are higher payoffs in the follow-up rounds. Is there any intuition?
No, you know why? Because since we pay, if the two people win, we pay both of them.
Okay.
So the more they learn, the more it's likely that they all win. That's it.
So then in later round, payoffs should be lower, right?
No, because in each round, instead of only one guy earning, there are two guys earning, and this push up the coefficient.
But I thought you split the payoff which means in the follow-up. So at the end, everybody should win £3, I would assume.
Okay, here, Ale, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I think we had a discussion about this, but I don't remember now how we interpret this. Will we face some difficulties in interpreting this? This is, yes.
I guess it might be to the fact that you control for the guesses of other players, which are systematically different across the rounds. But I still, I couldn't catch the intuition, so I thought that maybe you have some idea.
First instance, I thought was because more people are winning. But well, like she said, it's a zero-sum game. So if you win 10, the two people win 5. So it should be different. I don't remember. Yeah, but that's a good question. I think we need to Alex. I think we need to get back on that point.
Yes.
Why we get that? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Then Eugenio, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it was really brilliant. I think everything was great. You probably are wrong about Trump, but let's hope that you might be right in the end, although I'm not very optimistic there. So next week, we do have Alex Bryson presenting and Danny Blanchflower. They will be talking about labor unions and about whether labor unions increase job satisfaction and well-being on Thursday at 1 p.m. We hope to see many of you there. And Eugenio, thanks again, and also Alessandro for coming and for giving this great talk. And have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks to all of you, and very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.